Welcome back to Worship at Home. Finishing up this week's video. Got a friend Aldo from work telling a pretty incredible story about just how keeping God in his heart has kept him safe and got him through some really difficult times. Hope you enjoy. God bless.
Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face, oh God of Jacob. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face, oh God of Jacob. We bow our hearts, we bend our knees, oh Spirit, come make us whole. We turn our eyes from evil things. Oh Lord, we cast down our idols. Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Give us clean hands, give us pure hearts. Let us not lift our souls to another. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God, let us be a generation that seeks your face. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God of Jacob. Oh God of Jacob.
Welcome back, everybody. We're here this week with Aldo Sibi. He's a guy I work with. I recently met him. He's a new hire. He's got quite a story to tell. You meet people in your life and you can just kind of tell there's something different about them. And that's how I felt when I first met Aldo. I'm glad to have been getting to know him over time here. But he's got quite a story, and I'm hoping you enjoy it.
Good evening. My name is Aldo Sibi. I was born and raised in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. My father was a retired police officer, or was a police officer in New Jersey. My mother was head RN for Six Flags Great Adventure. I've got a little bit of a story to tell. I guess we'll start with what I talked with you about. The Lord has always been in my heart, and He's guided me through some of the darkest times in my life. And so I'd like to tell you my story, and we'll start off by saying, you know, we are in the best of times and we're in the worst of times. Best of times because we're seeing prophecy come true, the worst of times because we have to live it.
Yes.
So that being said, I lost my mother when I was 5 years old, and my father being a police officer at the time and having an aerial advertising business, he they wouldn't give him a steady shift, so they moved me off to my sister, who at the time had 5 children. And being, well, I hate to say the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak. Her family came first, and I was second fiddle, and it led to a lot of abuse and a lot of pain growing up early as a child. It made me question a lot of things. Grew up as a Catholic. I was born and raised as a Catholic. Went through the Catholic school system in the Diocese of Trenton, New Jersey, St. Philip, St. Peter's. And basically went to live with my father. Got away from the abuse of my sister that lasted about, I'd say 3.5, 4 years. Went to live with my father. My father was older. My father had me when he was 55. My mother was 50 years old. So at 5 years old, my mom died. 55, she had lymphoma. You know, there were many times my father would go out and I was alone. He would leave me alone at night. He would have to go to work. There were nights when he didn't come home. And I can tell you at 10 years old, 9 years old, that's very frightening. Mm-hmm. It was difficult. My father was from a different time period. He grew up in the Depression era. So he did things differently. So when I was at school, you know, where kids would get designer clothes, especially in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, you know, it was very in to be fashion savvy in that. My father was penny savvy. So there was a lot of things that didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I had a few, but I didn't have a lot of friends. And I learned to talk to the Lord and be my own best friend, so to speak, if that makes sense. Asked a lot of questions, and I know it sounds silly, and, you know, but we all talk to ourselves, and I did a lot of that. That was something I did growing up. My father shipped me off to military school. At the time, I hated it, Fort Union Military Academy. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I did 7 years at Fort Union Military Academy. Graduated an officer, worked with some of the finest folks that have gone on to become wonderful individuals. I grew up with them. Eddie George, the founder of Under Armour. All of those folks went to the same classes.
Eddie George from the Titans?
Tennessee Titans.
Oh man, I'm a Titans fan.
Would you like to meet him? I've got him on my Facebook.
Yes.
I can introduce you to him.
Oh gosh, he is one of my favorites. He's such a good guy.
Eddie is a good guy. He was in my company.
Wow.
Lived across the hall from me. He has a lot of good messages, and I recommend if you get a chance, I can introduce you.
That'd be awesome.
He puts a lot of good messages out there. He has God in his heart, and he's been blessed. He came from a single parent family, and he has a story to tell too. Very successful story, and it hasn't gone to his head. He's a good guy, and I'm proud to know him. That same year, I went back and met with my grade school sweetheart, and unfortunately we had a child, or fortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately. It was unfortunate the way we did it, but we had a child out of wedlock. I had a son, Shane Michael. He's a wonderful child. He's a great boy. He's grown up to be something. He's in law enforcement, lives in Tennessee right now. But being from the old school Italian family, my father kind of turned me away from having a child out of wedlock. I wanted to marry this girl, and he wasn't having any part of it. I turned to the church. I didn't feel right about it. Turned to the church, and I had been an altar boy. I had been involved with the church up until that point, and my father introduced me to Father McGee. Father McGee sat down and said, "Well, let me school you." We were sitting on a couch just like this in the basement of the rectory, and anyway, he made a pass at me and pushed him off. He made another pass at me, and pushed him back off. And he went on to tell me, you know, as he's trying to kiss me and hold my hand and doing weird things. It was terrible. He went on to tell me that, you know, having a child out of wedlock is a sin. I'm going to go to hell, and you need to not have this child in your life. And that was probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life. Because at that moment, even though all of this happened, my father, everything that was going on, that seemed to be, you know, how do you say no to the church? How do you say no to God? And irregardless of what happened, and I even went back and told my father what happened, and my father, old school Italian, don't say nothing. You know, this never happened. I'll deal with it. So it kind of got swept under the rug. It wasn't maybe a year or two later. I still kept in touch with my ex-girlfriend and tried to keep in touch with my son. I was a flight instructor at the time. I was teaching people how to fly ultralights. I was building ultralights. I had just graduated A&P school. But I was lost. I was lost, and my father was really starting to get up there in age, and an opportunity presented itself. But I wanted something different. I was missing something. It felt terrible. And at this point, with my father being sick, my sister and I, she came back into the picture. We didn't get along. You know, money does terrible things, and this is another thing that I noticed as a child and then a young adult, that things were very dark. It was you know, you see people do things that you wouldn't think they would do. You know, money it can be the root of all evil. It really is. It influences people and decisions that it's sad. It really is. It tears families apart.
Yes.
But hey, Pupster. Thank you. But we came to an agreement. My father needed to be taken care of. He had gone in, they put a pacemaker in. He had 5 bypasses, and he was down in Florida, at his home in Florida, and had a mini stroke, and so he wasn't able to take care of himself. So my sister and I, we came to a mutual agreement. She would get the house in New Jersey, I would get the house in Florida, and winter times I would take care of my father, and summer times my sister would take him up in New Jersey. And that worked for a little while. I moved to Florida, and in between all of that, there's a movie called Spotlight that's come out. Mitchell Garabedian is the attorney that's portrayed in there. When that all came out and went public, I was one of the few folks that came forward with the Trenton Diocese, and I reported my incident. Again, my father didn't want to make a big deal about it. He was actually embarrassed. He was embarrassed that you know, for all these years we went to Catholic church and Catholic school. My father grew up when they were teaching, when they were preaching Mass in Latin, so to put everything in perspective. So that strict Catholic family, you know, and then this happens. So that kind of went on behind the scenes. I get down to Florida. My father got sicker. It got to a point where he wasn't coming down anymore, and I had this thing in my heart. I had basically giving up my son, and that bothered me. And an opportunity presented itself. I was on Pine Island, and I was lonely. I didn't know anybody. Florida's home of the newlywed, nearly dead. One of the two. And Pine Island was no exception. And here I am on this little island, so I'm going to date myself here. AOL love connection. I'm gonna find somebody. I want to meet somebody. I don't know anybody. I work for Sears. I'm gonna find somebody. So I put an ad out there, and next thing you know, I get a response. Hey, my name's Jennifer. Do you want to go out on a date? Sure. 6 months later, we're married, and she has a daughter. She's gone through a divorce, and she doesn't want anything to do with her husband, ex-husband. I didn't know she'd been married 5 times before. I fell in love with this little girl, and this God had been saying in my heart, you need to do the right thing. You need to do the right thing. So I agreed. I said, I'm going to adopt your little girl. And I did. And sadly, there was an evil twist to this that will test anybody's faith. The second I signed those adoption papers, we went out, we celebrated the night of the adoption. The next day, she turned around and filed for divorce. And literally my world was turned upside down. In a very, very ugly way. I was literally put out of my house and never did anything wrong. I was blindsided. And turns out she'd been married 5 times before. They say love is blind. So you don't look at you want to put the forest before the trees, but you have these blinders on.
Yes.
So I was shocked, saddened. At this point, my father was too ill to travel. He's up in New Jersey. My sister and I, we don't get along, so I had nobody to turn to. But I did, and I'll never forget. I moved out to my little camper in Pine Island out at the airport because I had the flight school out there, and I had my car and a bag of clothes, and that's pretty much it while the divorce proceedings go on. And basically, she gets the house, and I can explain that. This divorce went on for almost 8-9 years because I fought for what I thought was right. And all the while, I'll never forget it, I was sitting in that camper, and I asked God, I said, why? Why is this happening? Why get so far, and I'm trying to do the right thing, and then all of a sudden, my world just crumbled around me. And I asked the Lord, I said, can you help me? Can you give me some guidance? If this is your will, so be it. Give me direction. I need your help. And I asked him for help. Again, just like the church incident and everything else, I've never lost faith, but I question why things happened. But because the judge had oversaw her 5 divorces prior, and her dad was friends with the judge, I had become a Mason when I was with the family early on, and I went through the Masonic rituals and all of that, and I found it to be very, very unholy. I didn't like it, and I'm not ashamed to say it at all. I wanted out, and I think part of that may have led to this whole thing, because her father and I kind of had a falling out when that happened, because he was the Grand Master of the Lodge in Florida, and that Judge Starnes, he was the one who did my in-doc interview for the Masons. You have to go through an interview process, and they vet you out, and then you go through your indoctrination, and there's a series of we'll call them rituals, because that's what they are. They're rituals that you have to go through to become a Master Mason. And I went through those, but I was very uncomfortable. And so, that being said, I asked the Lord. I said, "What what do I do? What's your plan? What's going to happen?" And if some of you remember Hurricane Charlie, and it wiped everything out. And I figured I was out on Burgess Island with a friend of mine that I had built an airplane for, and we went back. That night, the storm had passed, and we rode back in. The power was out. You couldn't see nothing. There was power lines down there everywhere. And we get to the airport, and the airport's flattened. There's nothing. Airplanes are upside down. It's a mess. And there's my camper. And it had a broken window. The hangar was completely gone. That was surrounding it.
Wow.
My car, same thing. One broken window, perfectly drivable, no damage. I could go right back into living in it. Of course, we didn't have power. We didn't have running water, so I went back out to Burgess for a little while, and power came back on, and things started to get back to normal. And I'm back at the airport and minding my own business, wondering what's next, where am I going, and all the while, I know this sounds silly, but I talk to myself, I talk to the Lord, and I asked the Lord, I said, what next? Where do we go from here? What are we doing? And I'll never forget it. Here comes this guy with a clipboard, and he comes walking down. He says, "You live here?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's my temporary residence right there." He says, "You got any kids?" "Yeah, just adopted a little girl." "What's her name?" Took all this information down, and I didn't think anything of it. And of course, things started getting back to normal. I started doing my route again. We all went back to work, and I'll never forget it. I had $5 in my account. I mean, I was down to my last penny, and I was counting on tips. I'd fix something, and customer would say, "Hey, thanks for fixing my tractor, or thanks for fixing my treadmill," and hand me $5 here, $5 there. But there's $5 in my account when I left that morning, and it's a blessing. It really is. So I was in Pahokee, Florida, and I threw the ATM card in, and it happened to say $5, and I put it in there, and I was like, that's not right. And there's this enormous amount of money in there. I called the bank. The bank's like, "Yeah, it was FEMA." I call FEMA. "Do I have to pay this back?" "No." And there was my answer. It was a blessing. It was amazing.
It's amazing.
It really was, because I couldn't afford an attorney.
Right.
And then the attorney that I did find, he had God in his heart. And he helped me when I was starting to, like I said, I never doubted what God always has a plan. But when things are at their darkest, somebody turns on the light. He turns on the light for you. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, he said, I'll take your case. We're going to work through this. And he worked for it for 8 years.
Wow.
And cut me breaks every chance he could, because he saw the situation. Along the way, he introduced me to his church. He was born again. And it just helped reinforce my faith, and it kept me going. It got dark again pretty quick. During the divorce proceedings, I told my attorney, I said, "Hey, Ray, Judge Starnes, he needs to recuse himself. He was the gentleman that did my interview with the Masons, and he's a friend of my father-in-law, and is involved in this whole thing." And the deeper we dug, the more, that's how we found out that she was married 5 times before, and all of that, and the judge, and same judge, and all of that had presided over all of this. And so here I sit in the courtroom. I'll never forget it. And this is, like I said, it got dark real quick. And my attorney stood up. He says, "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell, I'd like you to recuse yourself. My client has informed me that he interviewed you as a Mason when he was becoming a Mason in the Masonic Lodge in Fort Myers, Florida. And he also has indicated to me that you're friends with the plaintiff or defendant, I forget how it is, but
Right.
my wife's family. And that judge stood up and he looked at me and he looked at my attorney. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Mitchell." And I just sunk down in my chair.
Wow.
And it was almost like a battle that I couldn't win. So I said, "Well, what do we do?" He says, "Well, you can file a complaint with the Judicial Trial Commission." So I filed a complaint with the Judicial Trial Commission out of Tallahassee, Florida. And it wasn't 2 weeks later, driving down Pine Island, Stringfellow Road, this officer pulls in behind me and I'm fumbling to get my license, registration, insurance card out. And the officer walks up, he says, "Mr. Sibi?" I was kind of taken back because he knew who I was already. I figured, well, maybe the plates, he ran the plate, that's how he knows. I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Did you file a complaint against Judge Hugh Starnes?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Okay, next time we meet, if that complaint is not dropped, I'm going to find something in your vehicle that's going to put you away for a very long time." And I slid down in my seat even further. And I was just like, "Yes, sir." And I knew I couldn't win that battle. That was one of those dark moments that I took a deep breath. I called my attorney, and it turns out this judge is a history of this Judge Hugh Starnes. He has a history of being working for the devil is the best way to describe it. But I got through it. Again, I asked the Lord, I said, "What next?" You know, where do we go from here? And at that point, I wasn't going to church regularly, and it was, and that's shame on me. I should have, but there was a lot going on in my life, but I never lost faith. And I said, "What next?" And 4th of July came around and met my wife, my wonderful wife, Natalie. Turns out she was going through a divorce. She had been abused by her ex-husband. And we met in this very unique way, and I'll let her tell that story. We met, and our first date was, I had just finished building another airplane. I was still trying to keep my other business afloat, help pay for this child support, and did the old-fashioned thing. We started living together, and we complemented one another, and she's been a wonderful part of my life. And it's been an amazing run since then. She followed me to Okeechobee, a friend of mine who had a house on Pine Island, whose party we were at, where we met. He saw what I was going through, and I always I like to say this because I'm a big fan of the movie Pay It Forward, because so many people, Wayne Reed, Chip Branch, all of these people who didn't have to, saw what I was going through, and that was the what next. Where do I go from here? How do I do this? And there was always somebody there that just, they didn't give me anything, but they helped me along.
Yes.
They and I'm a huge fan of paying it forward because of that. I believe in giving back because so many gave to me when they didn't have to. So Natalie and I, we were friends with the family, and we just decided it was time to move on. And again, what next? Where do we go? What do we do? Still going through the middle of this divorce. We're kind of in limbo. We're building airplanes. We're working out of Okeechobee, and happened to just be searching through Barnstormers, which is an aircraft advertising website, and there was an ad for assistant director of maintenance, Dallas, Texas. So we pile everything in the car and we head out to Dallas and we do our interview. We fell in love with Dallas. Dallas was pretty cool, and they welcomed us with open arms. Said, "How soon can you start?" Not only how soon can you start, but here's an apartment that you can live in. as part of your salary.
Oh, wow.
So it just sorted everything out. There was, and these are the little things that I can't reiterate enough, because everything was gone. She took all my tools. She took everything. So I was literally starting out. And that was the amazing thing about my wife, too, because our relationship was based on love. It wasn't based on material things or what you can do for me or how much money do you have, because I didn't have anything. I had nothing. Other than that paycheck that would come in every week, and they were taking 55% of it. So, and that leads me.
Marriage that lasted a year.
And yes. She was awarded, in that marriage, she was awarded $55,000 lump sum alimony. She got my house that I had. We sold that house, and we built a house in Cape Coral. Built a beautiful CBS home, concrete block home. 3-2. It was gorgeous, tile floors, everything. That was going to be our home. Put a pool in the backyard, fenced in yard, everything was wonderful. Until it wasn't.
Right.
So I lost all of that, lost my dad's house, literally living in this camper. And she tried to take that too. For the 8-9 years of my divorce that it lasted. And until that lump sum alimony was paid off, I'd get a tax return. She'd get half of it. If I got a bonus, she would get half of it. The whole thing with the Catholic Church, while it wasn't a lot of money, she got half of it. Even though she had nothing to do with it.
Right.
She got half of it. And each one of these things is trying. So we're in Dallas, Texas now. We walk through the door, and this was a light sport aircraft manufacturer. They had not produced. There's a new category of aircraft called a light sport aircraft. It's not an ultralight. It's not a real airplane, so to speak, like a 172 or a 182. So fortunately, when I walked through the door at Indus, my boss, who was the director of production, he hands me the keys. He says, "Welcome to Dallas. Congratulations, you've been promoted." I said, "To what?" He says, "Director of production." Director of production? So you're telling me that, yeah, these are all your employees, and this is your production floor? I said, "Well, where's Ram, the boss?" "Oh, he's still in India." You know, of course, I'd never run a production floor before. I was as green as anybody else. And I'll never forget laying in bed, and I said, "All right, Lord, what next?"
What next?
What next? And this is true. This is a true story, because, I asked for it. Now I got it. You know, you got to be careful what you wish for. So we had to make the best of it. And, of course, I had my girlfriend at the time right by my side, and Natalie. And I said, "We're either going to sink or swim, but we're going to give it the old college try, because this is not an opportunity given to just anybody."
Right.
So Ram comes back from India. I've been there for a week and a half, and we're doing our changes. We're making the changes that I see fit to make a production floor. And I kind of read quickly up on how Henry Ford built Model T cars. What's the best way to set up a production floor? Because I had no idea. I really didn't. And literally, we set up stations and started cross-training everybody, and I started looking at what we were doing, what was working, what wasn't. And they were struggling to get past that prototype stage. We got the airplane through the certification process, and we got the airplane through certification. Initially, we were building one airplane a month, sending them out and having them painted as green airplanes someplace else. And then I said to Ram, we could do better. Let's start painting these airplanes here. At the end of the day, we were doing our thing, and even though every night I'd ask the Lord, what next? We were getting by. And every time it would kind of get dark, something weird would happen. And then, of course, we built the company up to such a great place that my boss sold the company to China. And I said, okay. I had 18 people working for me. And I had to let all of them go, and that was a very difficult day.
Yeah.
Back to that question, what next? I had to ask the question, what next? And I ended up down in Waco, Texas. I was working for L3. L3 put my application in, and we collected unemployment a little bit. I was moonlighting at an A&P school in Dallas. You know, there was a lot of odds that we never went without. You know, even when we thought it was getting dark again, it was, you know, what next? And he always provided. It always, no matter what, it always worked out. And so let's stop it at Waco then.
Okay.
We're you know, we've Indus has sold to China. I've let all of my employees go.
Well, thank you, Aldo, for sharing this incredible story. It's really amazing having the ability to look back and see, you know, where God was in your life during all those dark times when you thought, what's next, you know, and you can see God had, even though it was still hard, God was there. He had you. He placed the right people where they needed to be to get you through, because you always held them in your heart, even when most people would most likely say, I'm done with this, you know.
Right.
It's easy to do. It's easy to get discouraged and blame God.
Right.
You know, that's what we want to do. That's what the devil wants.
And that's what the devil wants us to do. And I'm not going to lie to any of your viewers. There were times when I almost went there.
Mm-hmm.
There were some pretty dark times when I just thought, when I snapped right back, because you know, every single time, no matter how dark or how bad it was, it always worked itself out.
Yes.
You paint the night, and you count the stars, and you call them by name. The skies proclaim, God, you reign. Your glory shines. You teach the sun when to bring a new day. Creation sings, God, you reign. God, you reign. God, you reign. Forever and ever. God, you reign. You part the seas. You move the mountains with the words that you say. My song remains, God, you reign. You hold my life. You know my heart, and you call it by name. I live to sing, God, you reign. God, you reign. God, you reign.
that you